Thanks very much, Will. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I just have some comments off the top, and then I'd be happy to take any questions that any of you might have. So a little bit more than 2 weeks ago, Ontario Liberals called on Doug Ford to move forward urgently with mandatory vaccinations for frontline healthcare workers and frontline education workers. At the same time, we called on Doug Ford to actually begin the work. And in fact, the work should have begun months ago, but to urgently start the work to produce a reliable, standardized, province-wide vaccine certificate. Over the last 2.5 weeks, a wider and wider chorus of voices has come forward to tell Doug Ford that this is the time for responsible and reasonable leadership in this regard. The Registered Nurses Association of Ontario, the Ontario Medical Association, the Council of Ontario Universities, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and the list goes on and on and on. Everybody, it seems, can see that it makes sense for Doug Ford to move forward in this direction, except for Doug Ford. And, you know, over the last couple of weeks and all of the conversations that I've been having, I've talked to people about the fact that on the vaccine certificate, for example, we know here in the province of Ontario that this is not necessarily groundbreaking. I'm holding here in my hand 2 of the very familiar yellow immunization records. These happen to belong to my daughters. We have done this before in the province of Ontario. In fact, both of these records have the government of Ontario or the province of Ontario's logo right on them. This is work that we've managed to do before for critically important challenges in the healthcare space that we have faced in the past. We see that our neighboring province in Quebec has decided to move forward and demonstrate the kind of competent and reasonable leadership that I referenced a second ago. And so just a couple of minutes ago, I sent a letter to Doug Ford. I've copied both Andrea Horvath and Mike Schreiner on that letter to Doug Ford. And in that letter, I am asking Doug Ford to meet with us, all 3 of Ontario's opposition party leaders, so that we can discuss all of what I just referenced a second ago. Mandatory vaccinations for frontline healthcare workers and education workers, the creation of a reliable province-wide standardized vaccination certificate. Look, we're about a month away, give or take, from the reopening, the scheduled reopening of Ontario's schools. University and college campuses are set to reopen as well. I think about my own kids, one going into grade 9, the other into grade 5, one who has already received both of her vaccines, the other who is not yet eligible to receive vaccines. With everything that we have been through as a province over the last 17 months, we need to use every tool in the toolkit, every single thing that we can bring to bear to make sure that, I'm going to say if there is to be a 4th wave, but lots of reports suggest that we are already in a 4th wave, whether we're in one or one is coming, that it be as minimal as possible. There have been far too many lives lost tragically during this pandemic, far too many businesses, particularly small businesses, that have closed forever. There has been so much sacrifice and suffering for 17 months. I am urging Doug Ford, let's get together, all 4 of the party leaders that we have here in Ontario. Let's work on this together. Let's make sure that come September, when our schools reopen and our campuses reopen, there are no more lockdowns. There are no more closures. There's no more going backwards. There's only going forwards together. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Okay, a reminder to everybody in the line, if you have any questions, if you could please write to the chat or raise your hand using the Zoom function, and I will call on you. Okay, the first question is Steve Paikin from TVO.
Morning, Stephen. As everybody knows, the thing that all premiers don't have enough of is time. He knows what your views are. I'm sure he knows the views of the other opposition leaders as well. Why would he, you'll forgive my use of the word, waste his precious time meeting with you folks when he already knows what you think?
Look, Steve, he could convene a Zoom meeting in the next 10 minutes and I'd make myself available. And look, the reason for it is months and months and months ago during the pandemic, Doug Ford did invite opposition leaders to come out. At the time, his government and others, us included, talked about this Team Ontario approach, being collegial, trying to work together. I have said throughout the pandemic that I believe it's the right approach, especially when you're dealing with a crisis. Now, I've stepped up with this letter today because there is an absence of responsible leadership at this moment. We have not heard a clear, understandable, logical answer from Doug Ford as to why he refuses to budge on both of these topics. Now, and in our system, as you well know, there's an accountability mechanism or feature that opposition parties are supposed to bring to bear if we are doing our jobs properly. The legislature is not sitting right now. And I think the people of Ontario would acknowledge and support all four of us trying to work together to get this right. If we go through a meeting and Doug Ford still stubbornly refuses to do the right thing, at least, and I'll speak for myself here only, at least I'll be able to tell myself and the people of Ontario that I am continuing to do everything I possibly can to make sure that they are safe, that they remain healthy, and that we get through the rest of this pandemic in one piece as a province. But to just simply say, well, Doug Ford's a busy guy, he might not want to meet with us. Vaccine certificates are hard. Let's not trample, as Andrea once said, on people's charter rights, even though she got it wrong and recognized that a day later. Just because things are tough, Steve, doesn't mean you don't try to get them done. I mean, that is the very definition of leadership, especially during this moment of crisis.
Okay, my follow-up is, and it's a more political question, would you acknowledge that his party has, as part of its coalition, a libertarian aspect that none of the other opposition parties have, and that therefore this is a tougher lift for him politically?
Yeah, look, for sure, there's no doubt that there is a component of Ford Nation, a component of that coalition around Doug Ford that is anti-vaxxer, that doesn't believe in government, that doesn't believe in the collective or working together. I think it exists. It exists for sure within their coalition. But it's been 17 months now. Thousands of women and men who've lost their lives tragically, thousands of businesses that have closed forever. Surely when you go through something as unprecedented as COVID has been, there are lessons to be learned for all of us, me included. And so in this case, I would have hoped, given all of what we've seen and all of what we've had to endure, that Doug would be able to rise above the petty partisan narrow interests and do the right thing. Do the right thing on certificates, do the right thing on the mandatory vaccinations. And in this case, based on my request today, do the right thing, reach out to the opposition leaders. Let's meet, let's figure this out, and let's work together to get it right for the people of Ontario.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next question is Snay Dougal from QP Briefing.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
I was just hoping you could kind of specify a little bit more on the vaccine certificates and what you'd like to see in terms of that. Would you like to see more of like a proof of vaccination type, an alternative kind of proof of vaccination card where businesses, if they choose, they can use it? Or would you like to see the province kind of issue more standardized guidance, let's say, where they suggest that, for certain businesses, this card or whatever, needs to be used?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, where I've been on this up until now has been that by having a reliable province-wide standardized certificate, that sets an even or level playing field. So if you happen to be a small business owner or a venue owner, you can then make the decision. You're empowered or enabled to make the decision to request the certificate so that you're keeping yourself and your workers safe and other customers or event attendees safe. So up until now, I've talked about it from the standpoint of empowering those entities or organizations that want to make the request. And I still believe that's important. But as we continue to see media reports and scientific and medical advice that suggests we are into a fourth wave already, as we get closer to schools and campuses reopening come September, if the numbers start to climb dramatically, which I don't want to happen, I don't know anybody who does want that to happen, but if we start to get into, let's say, dangerous terrain or more dangerous or risky terrain once again, then I think we should be looking at every option, which then to me means going a step beyond just empowering businesses and perhaps doing what I believe Quebec is doing to say, no, you'd have to demonstrate proof of vaccination before you could enter certain venues or restaurants and restaurants or other businesses. And I would say this is the kind of space where having a science table, having a chief medical officer of health to give that kind of advice based on the numbers and based on what they're projecting would be really, really helpful.
Okay, thank you. And I actually had a question on a different topic,
Sure.
just on schools. We heard from Dr. Moore last week that when it comes to school-age children, the province is tracking vaccination rates at a population level. And we've seen at least one health unit start to release vaccination numbers at individual high schools.
Right.
Just wondering your thoughts, like, do you think all health units should be required to do this? And do you think it would be helpful? And if so, I mean, should this be released just for students, or do you think staff numbers should be, would those be helpful as well?
Look, I think all of this stuff for staff, for students, both in healthcare and in education, obviously students in education, I think this should have been tracked from the very beginning. When my wife and I went for both of our doses, nobody asked us what we do for a living. When I took my older daughter for both of her doses, the first dose, nobody asked. I mean, she's obviously a young woman, so people would probably realize she's a student, but nobody asked where she went to school, what board she was attached to, none of that. When she got her second dose, she was asked, what school do you go to, by the individual administering the vaccine. So this kind of very arbitrary ad hoc approach, when weeks ago, the Ministry of Health and others in education, for example, confirmed they're not tracking it. I don't think that there is uniform across the board tracking in healthcare either. This just makes no sense to me. So yeah, from the very beginning, all of this information should have been tracked in a secure and reliable way. It's not too late to do the right thing. It is why I'm calling for the certificates. So that we know what the full picture looks like, so that we know whether or not we're talking about 80% of education workers or healthcare workers that have been double dosed, or 70% or 90%. We actually are all of us. And I know from time to time, Doug Ford cites statistics on this. I don't know where he gets them from, because we're all flying blind, including the government, on this. And I don't think that's acceptable or reasonable or responsible. Again, after everything that we've gone through, we should be using every tool in our toolkit to get through to the other side of this pandemic.
Okay, the next question is Laura Stone from the Globe and Mail.
Hi, Stephen.
Hello.
Dr. Moore has come out and said that he doesn't think passports are absolutely necessary right now. He said, cases will rise, but it's not a cause for panic. So how do you square what you are calling for here with the fact that the medical officer of health is not really backing up this desire for vaccine passports?
Yeah, so look, I'm not panicked. I just think that, again, after what we've learned through 17 months, we should be using every tool in the toolkit. I have immense respect for Dr. Moore, the work that he did originally in his local public health unit. Very happy that he's Ontario's Chief Medical Officer of Health for sure. I suspect if a week ago, 2 weeks ago, a month ago, Doug Ford had said, look, I got it. We're going to do what Quebec is doing. We are going to create a vaccine certificate. I suspect Dr. Moore would have been supportive and would be doing whatever he could possibly do, along with the science table and the rest of the government, the Ministry of Health and others, to get it right. And so I respect the opinion, but I don't want my daughter's school to close again. I don't want the economy to lock down again. I don't want anyone in this province to panic. But one of the key ingredients that's required to make sure, A, we avoid a tragic situation, and B, we avoid panicking, is having responsible and reasonable, competent leadership at the helm. And right now, Doug Ford being missing in action on this stuff and giving half-hearted answers about why he doesn't want to do it that make no sense and are not logical, is just, to me, it's the absence of the kind of leadership that we need right now. So I hope he reconsiders. Doug Ford, this is. I hope we get a chance, all opposition leaders get a chance to meet with him to talk about this. Hope he changes his mind, because look, it's never the wrong time to do the right thing.
And on the issue of mandatory vaccinations, can you clarify your position? You're saying no one should be fired if they don't get a vaccine. So how is that mandatory? You're just going to reassign people to desk duty? Is that really what mandatory vaccinations is?
Well, when you consider the reason for wanting to do mandatory vaccinations, which is to protect, in this case, let's say students, and to protect patients, and to protect everybody in both the healthcare and the education system, not wanting it to be punitive and wanting to respect the human rights code, which I've said from day one, I think makes sense. Look, Laura, we know that there are women and men who work in both healthcare and in education. who might have serious pre-existing health conditions. They might have medical advice that suggests they shouldn't take the vaccination because of those pre-existing medical conditions. I don't think a person like that should lose their job. I think we have lots of things that we can do. We can go through an education program with an individual who is just refusing or is vaccine hesitant or is anti-vax. I think we can work with their employer. I think if they're represented by a union, we can work with their union. They can be redeployed. But I just want to go back to what I said a second ago. We're not even tracking this. So sure, it's true. We could have lots of women and men who are saying no to the vaccination in healthcare and education. The sad thing for both of us, for all of us here in Ontario, is we're flying blind. We don't know. It is why the government should have been tracking this from day one. It's not too late to start that tracking now. So then when we're responding to a question or we're thinking about exactly what you raised a second ago, we know exactly how large the challenge is. Is it 5% of nurses in Ontario that don't have the vaccination, or PSWs or teachers, or is it 25%? Nobody really knows across the board. And again, I think that's, with everything we've been through, I think that's just insane and it's irresponsible. So I think there are lots of ways to deal with this. It does not have to be punitive, but we have to move in this direction with the kind of responsible leadership people in Ontario want.
Okay, there are no other questions on the line. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.